I shouldn't have been at all surprised to see Peter Hitchens here. I was wondering if you'd be able to get in from Oxford, because I didn't know what the train situation was.
No, well, sometimes they do prevent me from getting in.
They do.
Sometimes there was, I think, some snow had blown onto the platform at Paddington Station, so they pretty much stopped the entire Great Western Railway on those grounds.
I mean, it's interesting because
they didn't do that today.
No, there's not that much snow for those of us who have lived in other parts of the world where they have a lot of snow.
No, it isn't really very much, is it?
No, but it's enough.
It's absolutely enough.
I mean, I was watching it last night thinking, this won't probably last, it won't be here in the morning. And actually, it's the first time for a long time that I can remember snow on the ground that I actually had to sweep off the car.
Well, it fell on cold ground because we had so many days of hard frost, so it did settle a bit. It wasn't much. But it is extraordinary how we've become a country of excuses, and if there's any excuse to stop things, I think this was bad before the Great Panic. But since the Great Panic, when everybody was encouraged to stay at home, got used to it, liked it, any chance to resume sitting at home or working from home, as it's called, it is immediately seized.
Yeah, oh, absolutely right. I mean, I was talking to Rod Little earlier this morning, and he was talking about how when he worked for the BBC, he remembered walking to work from Streatham to Broadcasting House through the snow, because that's kind of what you did. But I don't think anybody does that anymore.
No, I have to say I find it a bit of a stroll to imagine Rod Little walking that far, but it's...
Yeah, I know. Well, I have no reason to disbelieve him.
No, I wouldn't. I don't doubt it. I just struggle to imagine
when
it.
he was the young, sprightly editor of the Day programme. I mean, I'm assuming he has no reason not to tell the truth on that. But I do remember walking long periods of time for, because there was no bus or because there was no train or tube, but people don't seem to do that anymore.
No, walking is dying out, isn't it? So you can do things like walking in a gym on one of those treadmills. Same with running.
That was one of my great surprises when I first moved to New York and saw all these people on Stairmasters inside, windows of gyms, and I thought, well, you live in a 30-storey apartment block. Why don't you just go up and down the stairs there?
It's not a bad reaction to the abolition of exercise. And one of the difficulties in American cities is, where do you walk?
Well, yeah.
There often aren't any sidewalks, and it's terribly, these long, straight blocks, it's quite boring.
It's quite dull.
So if you can do it while watching something...
And I suppose, to be fair, in places like New York in the summer, it's a bit hot.
I believe so.
I mean, I used to have to change shirts about 3 times a day when I worked in Manhattan. If I went to a press conference or something, you'd put a new shirt on for that, and by the time you got back, you'd have to change again.
It's not really very civilised, is it, North America?
It really isn't, no. Although it was all right when I was there just recently, when I went to see my mother. But let's talk about your column this week.
Yeah.
We've just got a little bit of breaking news. There's a terrible story up in Solihull at the moment. West Midlands Police confirmed 3 boys aged 11, 10 and 8 have died after falling into a lake in Solihull yesterday afternoon. A 4th boy, aged 6, remains in critical condition. It's a dreadful story, this.
Well, we were all hoping that at least some of them would survive.
Yes. Yeah, but I mean, again, I know it's going to sound very, pithy, but you just, if you've got children, just tell them, don't go on lakes when they're frozen. They're never frozen hard enough.
No, even when we were in Moscow and the river froze hard, you always took a great deal of care where you went and made sure other people had. I
would just never do it. You just don't want to.
You can't tell. Ice can be solid one moment and then can give way another. It's not. No,
yes.
Your advice is right.
No, right. Let's talk about Ukraine, where there's probably an awful lot of snow right now. The arrogance of folly.
Yeah.
You wrote about this weekend.
Well, I tried to. We discussed last week the Ben Abelow book, and I tried to turn it round, because the best way of judging any policy is how you would feel if it was applied to you.
Yes.
And if the policy which America has been applying to Russia for the past 25 years had been applied to America by, say, China, America would, I think, have gone to war over it. And I put the possibility to say that Quebec, largely French-speaking Quebec, have broken away from Canada, as Ukraine has broken away from Russia and have become an entirely separate country, and that other people have taken advantage of this. The Chinese have moved in and set up bases and moved in soldiers and airplanes. What would the United States do if there was a foreign power and a foreign alliance less than 300 miles from New York City?
Right.
It would, I think, almost certainly go to war.
Yes.
And it's extraordinary how this point just simply is not grasped or understood, that there are things you can do with countries that will cause trouble. People then say, well, you're making an excuse for the invasion. I'm not. I think the Russians were provoked. I think there's no doubt they were provoked. But I personally believe when someone's trying to provoke me, that's the point at which you should be most careful not to be provoked. And I think it was very stupid of Vladimir Putin.
And you've always said that.
But there you are. I bung that in before somebody starts saying, "Oh, appeaser," or "you're excusing war crimes," or whatever it is, or other bilge people come up with, because it's not the case. My other concern is this: that there is, I think, much more nuclear instability in Europe than there has been for a long time. I remembered, when reading Ben Abelo's book, the rather joyous occasion when I travelled to Washington, D.C. My brother was still living there at the time. I stayed with him, in fact, in his small house on Capitol Hill for the Gorbachev-Reagan summit of 1987, just before Christmas. Yeah. It was a lovely time to be there, and it was euphoric. Yeah. Because here at last were the two superpowers doing something to actually lessen the nuclear danger.
Genuinely making the world
bring
safe
the cold.
place.
Now, that treaty which they signed, amid the plaudits of the entire world, has now been ripped up by the United States. Most people don't realise this. They also don't realise that the United States likewise ripped up the anti-ballistic missile treaty, which has similarly huge effects. And both of these things make the possibility of some kind of nuclear exchange in Europe greater, not smaller. Gorbachev, before he died, very much criticised the action. And this coming together with a war in Ukraine whose extent is unpredictable. And for instance, we now get increasingly these events in Russia itself where airfields appear to have been attacked. And who knows how long it will be before something of this kind happens in Moscow itself. Now, the Russians have a way of reacting when these things happen. I personally think that the Russian attack on Ukrainian infrastructure came as a response to the blowing up of the Great Kerch Bridge to Crimea, which was
has that been fixed yet?
Putin is supposed to have driven over it, if you can believe that. It may be true. And the other thing it was a response to was the destruction of the gas pipeline, the Nord Stream 2, which I think is absurdly being blamed on Russia. Why would they destroy their own pipeline? And I think that each time these things happen, there's a new escalation, and what appears to be a Ukrainian move of sending drones into Russia itself to attack bases and sites inside Russia could lead to retaliation. Now, what if the war on the western side spreads outside Ukraine? Where are we then? And this is the moment. Remember the great panic when that missile landed in Poland. Where are we then?
Right.
How much further and faster could this go?
Well, I was talking to some military experts that week who said this will never be a Russian missile that has been fired into Poland. It will never be that, because even if it was, it can't be that.
It can't be. They had to say it wasn't. Who knows what? I don't think it was myself, but even if it had been, but there might come a point where it ceased to be possible to pretend otherwise. Now, I remember back in the 60s, you possibly saw it. It was never shown on the BBC. Peter Watkins made the film The War Game about a nuclear war in this country. And then some years later, in the 80s, there was an American version of the same thing made the day after, which I think quite a lot of people will remember. Yes. The problem with those films, they were actually very graphic and actually rather telling about what would happen to a civilized Western society if it was hit by nuclear weapons, and it's very bad. Yes. But what they couldn't do was come up with a realistic scenario for the outbreak of a nuclear war, because there wasn't one at the time. No. Now it seems to me that there is, and I, for the first time really in my life, genuinely worried that we are. I do think that we are.
And do you think that we got to this point, and to the point of the Russian invasion, because nobody was really paying attention to what was going on in Ukraine?
I think people thought that they could get away with it, and I think there's a huge lack of imagination and actually of straightforward intelligence here. I think the world leaders of the 1960s were cleverer than the ones we have now. I don't look at the assembly of people in either Washington or Moscow at the moment and think these are people as smart as the ones who were around then, or as experienced. And also, almost everybody who was involved in the Cuban Missile Crisis, for instance, had been in war. Yes. Kennedy had been in war. Khrushchev had been very much involved in the Soviet. Well, everybody in the Soviet Union remembered war. They all knew what a horrible thing it was, and so they were very anxious to avoid it. Now people don't know. No. They think you can get away with it, and I just get the sense of drift.
Well, an awful lot of the White House staff, I understand it, are former members of the Obama administration when Biden was in that, and foreign policy in his day was not up to much, it seems to me.
No, but you just don't get the sense, as you don't get it here, that the people who are talking quite loudly about it have any real clue about about either history or the real nature of war. They haven't seen it, they don't understand it. And it's just, why is, again, during the Suez Crisis, during the Vietnam War, during the Iraq War, the Western world was hugely divided. Are we doing the right thing? In Ukraine, there's just this absolutely deadening unanimity, which cannot be good. Everybody is assuming automatically that there's only one side in this argument and nothing else to be said. That's never true.
No, but it becomes more and more true in almost all circumstances now, as we find every single week, unfortunately. Peter Hitchens is here with us. I mean, you're a man that uses the train probably more than most. Will you be affected by these train strikes?
I don't know. My experience with RMT strikes is that the trains are better on strike days than they are on non-strike days.
That's what I've heard. And in fact, I heard that this morning from some people who travel in from parts north, not in the very far north, but sort of Hertfordshire way, that the train services this morning were much better than they normally are.
The real problem for railway operators is passengers. If there were no passengers, they could run a perfect service. As I discovered during the lockdown, when the trains were running and I carried on going to work, often I had a very expensive chauffeur-driven train every day.
This is
the trains were always on time. There was never any problem because I was the only passenger. It took no time to load me on and get me off. So there we are.
This is why
but passengers, as soon as they turn up, and in strike days, the passenger numbers fall. So the trains run more reliably. It's interesting, isn't it?
And presumably there are fewer people working there to mess up the plans.
Well, I wouldn't like to say.
I mean, I
don't want to tempt fate here.
The other thing, of course, is that's what the NHS would prefer as a model, with no patients. You know, lots of lovely gleaming hospitals, but unfortunately the patients screw things up in a massive way, the patients, because you have to deal with them and you have to fix them and you have to try and...
I'm just going to say this because I'm going to keep on saying it to somebody. This is what we need, is to introduce a French-style health system here. Theirs is equally dedicated to giving people free health care, but it is much, much better than ours, and it's much better run, and it works better, and it delivers better, and it's time we stop saying, oh, well, if we get rid of the NHS, it'll be the American system. It won't. No. There are other ways of doing it. Let's have a French-type NHS here, please.
The key to the answer...
No public wards either, everyone gets a private room.
The key to the answer for what's wrong with the NHS is that nobody else copies the system. There is nobody else in the world that does it that way.
The arguments for it are always panic arguments, so we can't touch it, nothing can be changed. And it can be changed, it could be changed, and it would be so much better if it was, and it ought to be.
Yes, I couldn't agree with you.
We should look at France, we should send a delegation over to France, look at their system, and find out exactly what it is they do right. Well, do it.
We're giving them enough money.
Well, not for that.
No. But we don't know what for.
Well, no, I believe in giving the French money to stop migration. I think it's the most effective.
Yeah, if it works.
It does work. The more we give, the better it'll work. It's a serious country. I keep saying I have a lot of time for the French, and if we give them hard money, they'll give us hard action back. But we have to be prepared to pay enough.
Right.
And compare with the stuff we waste money on, HS2, Trident Renewal, who knows what else, that it does absolutely no good at all. Net zero.
Well,
it's worse.
Which brings us to the power cut situation. There was a power cut in Sussex last night when it started snowing. Nobody knows why. Didn't last very long, but it was disruptive.
It's probably one of those local transformer jobs,
sort of brownouts or something like that. But I was listening to somebody from the National Grid this morning talking about how they've got coal on standby, and apparently he didn't explain it very well, and the person interviewing him wasn't asking the right questions, but apparently you have to warm it up.
Oh, you do?
In order to make it ready for use, and they've got it ready for use because they, amazingly, can't find enough energy from wind power.
No, they saved a couple of generators at Drax, which has mainly gone over to this ridiculous biofuel.
Yes, the biomass wood chips.
In. But they have destroyed so many other coal-fired power stations that it's still a strain. I mean, we are having some difficulty importing the electricity from France, which has kept us going for a long time. When the wind doesn't blow, we have to have French electricity, and the French nuclear power system has been badly in need of maintenance and renewal, and that's slowed down their supplies. So there is a danger. And there's another thing about power which people ought to know. There's a thing called inertia in the system which keeps it going, which stops it from flipping into power cuts, and that is provided only by nuclear or coal or possibly hydro power generation. Wind won't do it. You have to have that inertia being produced.
Right.
And one of the reasons why you may remember back in the summer of 2019 we had an extraordinary power cut. That was because of a failure of inertia. We really do need coal and nuclear, and it's absurd. I say it again, the Indians and the Chinese are building huge numbers of coal-fired power stations. If we closed all our coal-fired capacity, it wouldn't change the effect that they're having, whatever it really is.
And yet, the man from the National Grid was very insistent, despite being questioned on it several times, that they will be phasing coal out.
Well, I think that may not turn out to be true. I think they won't dare now. But the other thing, we rely enormously on gas, which we pretend is a clean fuel, but it simply doesn't qualify. And also, when these things go wrong, there are banks of diesel generators all over the country, which are anything but green, which cut in to save us from power.
Well, we're now doing that green investment, aren't we, whereby we don't produce any fracking of our own, but we'll buy in the Americans' fracking gas, because that's fine.
And for people who don't like nuclear, we buy French nuclear electricity and quite a lot from other continental countries as well. I think we even buy electricity from Ireland at the moment.
I wouldn't be surprised. Well, we buy an awful lot of gas from Qatar as well.
Well, yes, of course.
Which, of course, is a country which has a very bad record on human rights.
Law-governed democracy.
When they comes to playing football.
Everybody's fine, nothing to worry about there.
And finally, what's wrong with the hereditary peers in Parliament?
Nothing. We should go and hunt them down and bring them back.
Yeah, well, don't worry, we didn't get rid of all of them, did we? Because
almost all.
In all Blair's arrangements, there was 99 of them left behind.
Yeah, but tiny numbers. The great thing about these people say, well, how can you have legislation revised by people who owe their seat in Parliament to the fact that Charles II slept with their great-great-great-great-grandmother? So that's exactly the kind of person you need in the House of Lords. They don't owe anything to anybody alive.
Right.
They may feel a very strong debt to Charles II, but he has no place in modern government, and he can't put any pressure on them. And the great thing about the hereditary peers, as I used to find when I went over there to visit the House of Lords when I went there, nobody could push them around. Now, isn't that exactly the kind of legislative chamber that you want, one where you can't push the people around? MPs, on the other hand, they're basically government employees. They can be threatened, they can be cajoled, they can be blackmailed, and they can be pushed down the chute of embarrassment and shame and disgrace if they give any trouble at all. They're powerless. Whereas hereditary peers, they could say to the government, no, that's a stupid piece of legislation, it's unwise and wrong, I'm not voting for it. I prefer that, bring them back.
And if you
were
made a Lord in the House of Lords because of your affiliation to a particular party, presumably you're not in favour of that either, then?
Well, there are people I know in the House of Lords who make a decent job of it, and undoubtedly they try very hard to be good. But the fact is, you have to dance with the one who brung you. If a political party has put you into the Lords, you feel a sense of obligation towards it. So if there's a measure of doubt as to whether you should vote for something or not, you will tend to do that out of loyalty rather than out of reason. That's bad.
Yeah. It really is, and there's too many of them anyway. I mean,
there has also been used to pay political debts and to keep control over people, and it's far too big. I don't know what. In many ways, abolition may be the only answer, but if you abolished it and then went and hunted down all the old hereditary peers and said, please come back, you could do an awful lot worse than what we have now, or what we would have if we had that disastrous thing, an elected second chamber, which would have exactly the same authority as the House of Commons and would fight with it all the time. You'd never get anything
Which
done.
is what Keir Starmer is proposing,
Well, that's crazy. Hasn't anybody told him?
No, apparently not. But of course, he proposes lots of things, and he doesn't then generally do
Well, we don't really know what he's going to do, because almost certainly he'll do it in concert with the Liberal Democrats in some kind of alliance, and that means that he will be free from any manifesto commitments in reality and can do pretty much what he likes and what they want.
Yes, exactly
right. What they like and what he wants.
Yes. Well, I mean, we're still a very long way away from any kind of general election, it would seem.
It's not that far,
Rishi Sunak and his managerial kind of style is like somebody who's come in as a management consultant to ruin everything.
I don't know. I think they have been handed a pretty horrible legacy.
They have.
I don't have any time for any of them, but I do feel slightly sorry for them that here they are with a whole load of strikes that they don't know what to do with. Though, of course, Sunak is ultimately the cause of these strikes, because the ultimate cause of strikes is the inflation which he brought about by his acceptance of the COVID panic.
And now they're hoping that the inflation rate is going to dip down, but we are out of time, sadly, so we'll have to pick that up next week. Good luck getting about the rest of the week on the trains, or whatever lack of trains there are, or whether there are any trains at all. We just don't know.